Hi, everybody. Welcome back to Psychedelics Today. This is Joe Moore, joined by host Kyle Buller and special co-host Jesse Gould, co-founder, founder at Heroic Hearts. How you doing today, guys?
Good. Great to be back talking to you both.
Yeah, it's been a bit, so happy to have you back on. This is great. And before we dig in, just a reminder, if you want to support us, you can leave a small monthly donation at patreon.com/psychedelics today, or check out some of our classes. On September 23, we kick off an 8-week program called Navigating Psychedelics for Clinicians and Therapists. And it's a great foundation for finding your way through the space. The psychedelic landscape is strange, complicated, and we help. So if you want us to act as a little bit of a guide for you trying to find your place, we can. Come join us. Learn more at psychedelicstoday.com. Again, it starts off September 23. There's 2 time slots, noon and 5 Mountain, 2 and 7 Eastern. So folks from Europe, Australia, and all over North America can join with a little bit of discomfort in Australia, but everything else should be fine. Yeah.
But we do have an Australia time zone coming up too. That starts on Wednesday, October 20th. So that's a Wednesday, and that's 7 p.m. Australian Eastern time. I think that's the correct terminology. And I think it's also worth mentioning too, this is going to be, I think, our last Navigating Psychedelics for Clinicians and Therapists for 2021. If we started a next round of cohorts, it would go into the holiday season. Just gets a little confusing there. So if you want to jump in before the year ends, do it now. And we'll be kicking things back off in the new year.
All right. So think we're good to dig in. And yeah, let's kind of refresh people about Heroic Hearts, Jesse. Some people may not have listened to those podcasts yet, but what does Heroic Hearts do?
How dare they? They should go back and listen to all of them. So yeah, I mean, I'm a military veteran myself. I founded Heroic Hearts, and I can get more into that story, but it's also covered in some of the other amazing episodes. But essentially, I had my own struggles with mental health, quickly found that the options available to me were extremely limited and oftentimes more hazardous to the health than beneficial. And that led me on the current chapter of my life into the jungles of Peru and finding out that psychedelics were not the scary substance that I've been led to believe, but actually quite beneficial and had tremendous power in many different ways. And so Heroic Hearts was established out of sort of this obligation that came once I had my own healing and saw these other amazing stories of bringing this and this discussion, at the very least, to the veteran community. For your audience who may not know, the veteran community, as the world in general, but specifically the veteran community, is going through a mental health crisis with sort of record rates of post-traumatic stress disorder and very high rates of suicidal ideation, especially in the past 2 decades. The suicide rate has been anywhere from 17 to 21 veteran suicides a day. So if you extrapolate that over 20 years, you're getting a quite significant number. And no matter what the VA has done and hundreds of billions of dollars going into this, it hasn't dented it at all. So on this other side, we're seeing psychedelics, emerging, renaissance, having tremendous benefit for all sorts of mental trauma, but particularly PTSD. So Heroic Hearts educates and connects veterans to a variety of psychedelic modalities with a full support system, including coaching, preparation, vetted retreat centers and clinics, and then follow-up integration coaching, community building. And so just trying to set everybody up for success. It's really, as we all know, it's sort of a very new emerging. And so there's growing understanding, but there's not a lot of infrastructure. And a lot of the people we're dealing with have fallen through the cracks of other systems. And so we're all here together as a community in the psychedelic space, trying to build this infrastructure in our own little, corners of our lives and our social networks.
Excellent. Yeah. And you've been at it for years, doing scholarships to get people access, and things have really grown, right? There's the UK group. There's now an affiliation with Imperial College. There's research happening. And I heard you mention maybe a Canadian group.
Yeah. So, it's as many of those things, I'm sure it's the same with psychedelics today and everything you guys are involved with. I started it, but then it took a life of its own and started, dragging me along the ride. So I'm pretty much just trying to hold on. So it's sort of the combination of, one, the tremendous demand for this, of how big the problem has actually gotten, but two, sort of the explosion of psychedelics in terms of popular media, in terms of research, in terms of acceptance around the world. All of those two factors just kind of contributed to this thing that I'm still trying to fathom and still trying to hold on to. But currently we have a wait list of veterans from around the world of over 800, primarily in the U.S., which is a huge number, and it's just going to exponentially rise from there. But in the few years, we have a branch in the U.K., which are doing amazing things over there. And then we just this year started a branch in Canada, and they'll operate independently. So they're more of their own entities, because at each country, the veteran voice is a little bit different. The community is a little bit different. So our goal is to have the Heroic Hearts sort of brand name be this source of independent and trusted knowledge and access to these therapies without money in the pocket from we're sponsoring this brand or this product. And so in Canada, in both the communities, they've really started sprouting and being their own independent voices for the communities there, with things going on in each spot. The laws are different. So for instance, in the UK, there's a great group of researchers and clinicians that meet up regularly. There's some members of parliament that are involved. The UK branch, in accordance with the US branch, we just made a first of its kind psilocybin study in a partnership with Imperial College. In Canada, we're working with the organization Therapeutic to help increase compassionate access to veterans seeking psilocybin. And then in the US, we have a few partnerships with universities. The main ones with University of Georgia, University of Colorado Boulder, some others in the making, and then just advocacy all around. So being involved with SB519, which is the bill in California, and we were fiscal sponsors of the Oregon bill, Measure 109, and then just a few of these decriminalizations all over Massachusetts, DC, and then that research bill we were supportive and pushing for in Texas. And so there's a few others that are growing from there. But it's really there. There's a lot of different ways to push this. So really trying to see what methods work best and push it forward with the help of you guys, because you guys are spreading the word, spreading the awareness.
We're trying. So I remember in the UK group, you had access to pretty influential politician over there, and I'm kind of curious if you've had any new allies come aboard in the States from the political side.
Yeah, I mean it's growing. Like I said, it's a different political environment in the UK, which has been interesting to learn about. And in some ways, I feel like they're making more progress, but in other ways, it's still a little bit more conservative. So obviously, they don't have like the different region. They don't have the sort of state laws that can do independent stuff. So in the US, it's interesting because it's really, you see a lot of, now that a lot of us have a little bit of traction and years under our belt, a lot of us, I think, are now starting to come together and see how we can push this forward together. So, with the and each, if it's a statewide thing, obviously you need the advocates on the statewide. So Senator Wiener in California has been huge, and some of the other co-authors of that bill. In Oregon, we've been pretty tied in with sort of the advisory committee. I just talked to Tom Eckert yesterday, who's an amazing person. Some of the people, like the researchers, like Lynette Averill's doing great things in Texas, and so she's pushing it. And then, up here in New York and in DC, there's also all sorts of people. The Plant Medicine Coalition, Brett Waters is doing some great things. All sorts of different people are coming, and it's just, and I'm sure you guys, like, your phone's like buzzing all over. John Lebecki, who's with MAPS, he was really instrumental at getting there's a more advocacy from Crenshaw and Allen that are going to try to be pushing a federal bill. There's movement inside the NIH. So I mean, it's behind the scenes. It might people see it in the newspaper more and more, but behind the scenes, there's a lot of political activity going on, and so there's just some great people around in many different states tackling it different ways. But fortunately, they are communicating, and I think that's with these sort of movements. I think it can be easy to kind of get in this competitive mode as with everything, and especially now that there's more profit there. But it does seem and I'd like your guys' opinion. It just seems from me that there are obviously sort of the typical players or maybe the bad players, but there does seem to be a pretty good representation of people who sincerely and legitimately want to use their skill set to push this forward. And I see a lot more collaboration than I might expect in other fields.
That's great. I'm kind of curious if you feel pretty good still about the trajectory of Oregon.
Yeah, I haven't heard anything. I don't know if there's something out there, but I've only heard good things. I mean, it's still, no matter what. I mean, things are never going to look exactly the way that they originally start off. But just talking to Tom yesterday, seems like it's on that path. And no matter what, it's going to be a flagship for the rest of the country. And it's a very tricky issue when we push into this, because we do want to do it responsibly. I know there is an argument that these shouldn't be illegal in the first place or what have you, and I'm not necessarily arguing against that, but to bring this into a medical model or to a model where people are actually using it regularly for a healing purpose, whether that is based off of a mental health issue or just general life wellness, that does need more considerations, because there does need to be some thought and consideration into who's going to do that, where it's going to be done, all these sort of metrics, which can eventually work out just in kind of a free market. But there's a lot of, like, for instance, with vets, like that's part of what Heroic Hearts is doing, is that we go to the different facilities, we go to the different healers or facilitators, we train our coaches. That way we know for sure if we send a veteran to some place that they're going to get the best quality that's tailored to what they need. And so that's tricky if you don't have those parameters there. And so I think overall it'll be good. I think it'll be a good test case. I think it'll be good to learn of how it goes and how we can progress it through the other states. But at the very least, it starts a sustainable model, I think, with especially with psilocybin, where we can start figuring out how we can have these sort of group therapy dynamics, or for those that want it, they can have kind of more of a one-on-one session.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, agreed. It's I'm really excited about how open-ended it is right now. You don't necessarily need to have any kind of indication to get a session. You can. There's probably going to be some very low-cost options, which is lovely. But quality is TBD, right? On all that, and there's plenty of issues left to be worked out in Oregon.
Yeah, I mean, and that's what people might not. I think you kind of get the sense it's easy to see something on the outside and not know how complicated these things are. Of just being involved in these conversations from day one, there's so many different communities and demographics that need to be considered, that were considered, and they all have different needs, demands, and that is so hard to build a fabric and framework around that. Just to give people some perspective on it is oftentimes, and with the war on drugs, the hardest hit communities were minority communities and poor communities. And the fear there was, one, they wouldn't get necessarily representation, because that's pretty common when laws change. But two, similar to cannabis, where if it does become legalized or decriminalized, then still it's the poor and minority communities that are not getting any piece of it. They're still getting kind of the short end of the stick. It's people who had the capital who are making like the cannabis Starbucks. And so that's a consideration. The indigenous communities that use some of these as sacraments, or that have traditions around it. On our side, the veteran communities that, might want to go to a clinic, but really would benefit from the communal access of it. And there's so many different voices going into it, and there is very conscientious people involved, very intelligent people. And so I think if it were to start anywhere, this was the best spot for it to start with all the people involved. And so I'm actually personally excited. You kind of, you never know, but I think it'll be interesting. I think it'll be a good positive test case for the rest of the country to follow.
Totally. I mean, I would never even imagine, a few years ago that we would be getting here, right? Just thinking that it was really just going to be within like FDA approved clinics or something like that. So, I'm excited to see where it goes. It just feels huge.
Absolutely.
And you're right. It is very complex, right? Thinking about like all the different communities that need to be served, thinking about equity, inclusion, all that. Yeah, these are tricky things to navigate.
Yeah, and then sourcing, licensing. Yeah, there's like particular considerations to where, again, it's not just a conglomerate that eats up all the license. And but to Joe's point, it's open-ended too, where you don't have to be an MD or social worker to get a facilitation license. You can be. You just have to go through the qualifications and testing or the certification and stuff like that, which is great. Because we don't want to just these substances have often been used by ceremonial communities, indigenous communities, and to say like now you have to have an MD to do this would be sort of a ridiculous kind of counter to the thousands of years that these have been used.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. Yeah, and I just love how democratic it is. Like the basic requirement, from what I understand, is a high school diploma, which is amazing, and then whatever certification they end up landing on or defining. So it's a really, really cool thing that's going on there.
Yeah, absolutely. And like, again, with the veteran community, that's beautiful just because when we work with veterans, this is a community of service, right? They've already volunteered to be in the military, and that is a core principle inside them to do work that helps others, that helps the community. And so having that access to where they could potentially get the certification, then contribute and pay it forward to the rest of their community is really beautiful for what we are trying to do.
Mm-hmm. Now, I'd like to talk about SB519 a bit. So you were also pretty involved in that effort?
Yeah, so Heroic Hearts Project was a co-sponsor of that with another organization called VETS. And so we signed on early and at the request of Senator Wiener and his staff, just given our association with Oregon and the success there. And so it's been successful. There's a little bit of a hiccup, a little bit of a delay. So basically, for those that don't know, SB519, it's different from Oregon. So to give the broad frameworks, and this is a very crude assessment of it, Measure 109 in Oregon is sort of so the Measure 110 in Oregon was a broad-based decriminalization. Measure 109 is psilocybin specific, and it essentially allows people to, in 2 years, access psilocybin either through a clinical modality or communal modality with licensing and with proper protocols around it. But they can go there, like you said, for any sort of just wellness dynamic and have access to that. So it really opens up psilocybin for use in these settings. SB 519 in California is more of a traditional decriminalization where, technically if you have a bag of mushrooms in California right now, a cop can arrest you or, all the other implications that come from that. So these decriminalization bills are generally about, hey, this shouldn't be illegal in the first place. You shouldn't be arresting people for something, one, that's not really harming society. But two, if there is some sort of drug problem, that's a mental health issue, not a criminal issue. So it does that, and especially on the psychedelic measures, it's not a substance of high abuse. And so removing the criminality really just culturally opens up a lot more. It's not you're a criminal. It's something that if it's decriminalized, let's talk about it. We can potentially build protocols, we can build groups around it to make it even safer. But the measure also has an ability for sort of communal access of it, kind of similar to what I was saying before, to where not only, because before a lot of decriminalization, if you just have the personal use, but then you have a group, and the healer might have more than that for the community, then he could be in trouble. So this kind of gets rid of that to where they can have these healing circles, these communal settings, which again, these are all measures that make it safer. These are all measures that prevent any danger that we fear with substances that we don't necessarily know or understand. So there's a lot of great things for it. There's focus on psychedelics, not only plant-based, but also MDMA and originally ketamine and LSD. Dropped ketamine just because there's some fear around it for not only abuse, but how it's been used for rape, essentially, date rape, which was a fear in California for some legislators. But we got past some big movements, the Senate and some other committees. And then the last couple of steps are it has to get voted on by the assembly and then signed by the governor. So the assembly was sort of the big next hurdle. And in order to get into the assembly to be voted on, it had to go through this one committee run by one of the representatives. And she was kind of support of some things, but not support of the other things. And so potentially we would have had to change the bill without even the assurance that we would have passed the assembly. So Senator Wiener just made sort of the decision that instead of potentially losing or not getting enough votes, and then it just starts from ground zero, to just holding it where it's at. And then next year we can pick it right back up. So all the progress, we still have the progress. It's just delayed by about a year. And in that time, that allows us to educate, that allows us to talk to people, see where the concerns are. But overall, it was a very uplifting sort of bill because myself and some other veterans, we over the course of the week, we talked to groups and groups of representatives and people in the government in California, and even to the lobbyist surprise, when they heard our story and some other stories, they were actually open to changing their opinion, which I think we don't see necessarily that much in politics anymore. We just kind of see of like, this guy represents these things and that's how he's going to be till he dies. Or this woman is this party and that's her platform. But conversely, and that's what we see, I think, with psychedelics in general, when people actually, they have the initial reaction, they have the stigma of like, those are bad, those are for crazy hippies. But when they see what's going on right now, the science, the people that are actually being helped, especially veteran communities for politicians, it's hard for them to ignore. And to their credit, a lot of them will listen to the evidence, listen to what people are saying, listen to their constituents, which is the point of a public servant, and change their mind, which was very uplifting.
That's outstanding.
Yeah. So I know, like, since you're a vet, I wonder how you take this. I know there's been some conversation around like focusing, like just hearing you say, hey, once we kind of enter the conversation, there's a little bit more support. Like, what's your take on that strategy of like kind of bringing vets into the picture for this? And I know, that it's definitely been a strategy that MAPS has mentioned publicly here and there. It's kind of like a bipartisan issue. You can get both sides on board. But yeah, I don't know. What's your take on that?
Yeah, I mean, as with anything, I think it can be sort of a fine line on some sides, because obviously you don't want to use any demographics, including veterans, just for your own purposes as sort of this token group that we're going to use and possibly exploit to get our message across, even though we don't really care about them. That's kind of the bad case scenario. And I think that's kind of been avoided. I've seen some, I think it kind of comes more in the sometimes the for-profit, where they want sort of the token veteran side just to make more money or get that extra seed round or what have you. But generally speaking, from the people who are, at least at this stage, the people who are passing these initiatives and the people who are doing sort of the research and stuff, like Rick Doblin, if anybody talks to him, they know he's not doing this maliciously or to exploit any group. He's doing it because it's a group that needs it and their voice is, right, very powerful. So why not heal and also help others heal through this? And the veterans that are speaking to this have been healed, and so they want to spread their story. So, I mean, there is that. I think we need to keep an eye on that. But fortunately, there's a couple of veteran groups like ourselves, and as we, I think, show ourselves to be trustworthy and independent of any forces that might change people's opinion of us. I think, we can kind of serve as sort of that watchdog in a way of, well, let's not work with this group or that group. But I mean, MAPS has done great things, not only psychedelic space, but to veterans. And I think a lot of these initiatives too, that's why I'm supportive of them, and I'm happy to hop on, and it's effective. And so I personally haven't felt like I was exploiting. The vets in my community haven't either. If those are out there that do, I'm more than open to talking to them, listening to them, and seeing whether that's the case. But it's a small enough community. Everybody in this community runs across each other all the time, and the circle, it's 1 to 2 degrees of separation. So I think because it's still small, there's enough checks that we all kind of know what each other's doing, and it kind of gets called out if there's necessarily easy to find bad players there.
And back to specifics on SB 519. I was pretty okay with the possession limits getting put in place because, it's somewhat de facto legalization, even though we're calling it decrim there. And, it's a big deal. And possession limits just to get that in seemed rational. Like, did you have any perspective on the possession limits?
I mean, a little bit. And at the end of the day, I understand counter positions to it because there were a few. And where I'm at, there's no black and white, and so I want to listen to what everybody has to say, and I understand if they might not agree to it, and it might not be their best bet. But the phrase that was kept getting used, and you don't want to take this too far, obviously, because then it can completely change it. Yeah. But don't let the perfect get in the way of the good enough, and that's the case. It's politics. Like, you're not gonna. You look at how dysfunctional Congress is, and it's a wonder that anything gets passed. And so with this, small changes like that, it seems necessary. I don't know if there's ever been a bill that hasn't changed from beginning to end. And so certain things like that, and even, dropping ketamine, we're open to doing that just because it's already Schedule 3 and there's access to it. And, there are some concerns that we understood. Yeah. So the possession limit, for me, if you looked at the actual possession, it was a huge amount. It was more I think even with the LSD, it was more than you could feasibly use.
It's more than I've had my hands on ever. Exactly. It's pretty impressive numbers.
So the numbers were big. And so it wasn't that was restricting. And so then it becomes kind of more of a conceptual, why can you limit this? But then we also have to look at where we're at in changing drug policy, changing the drug war. I know we all get excited because so much has happened, and you guys have been in this long as well, but just in the past 2 years, it's been a dramatic shift. The past 2 years versus the previous 2 years that I was, the prior 2 years that I was doing this, the conversations are night and day different.
So different.
And people coming into this and getting excited and being in that, think okay, well, there's no walls, let's just go. But it's still a very young movement, relatively speaking, at least this phase of it. And so these initiatives, we have to let them breathe a little bit. These are stepping stones. It's even the Texas bill, it's not allowing more access, but it's allowing more research. And at the very least, it's allowing more conversation. And the decriminalization, there's still issues around it, but is that a next step? I think so. And I'm open to different arguments, but for me, it's the long-term game. What's going to get us to more access to this, and what's going to get us, and I think time is actually our friend as well, because what I see was problematic with the cannabis side of things was it essentially went from, you could still access it, but criminalized to almost medical or legalized pretty quickly. And even though there is a lot of valid therapeutic uses of cannabis, we kind of just had these two different sort of night and day sort of switches. So this is it's much more complex than that. But from my perspective of veterans using it, there really wasn't the time or the discussion of developing protocols. And even now with Access, I don't see a lot of people who have knowledge of how to use it therapeutically, or therapists that are qualified to do that, even though it has tremendous benefit. It's kind of more for a lot of just like high THC content, which, not demonizing, not saying it shouldn't be accessible, but there is a great medical value that I think hasn't been discussed or hasn't been developed because it kind of transitioned from one to the other. And so I'm hoping with psychedelics that we do the protocol, just because what I've seen working with veterans is that there is better ways of doing it if you're doing it for trauma. To each their own, however you want to use things recreationally and in certain contexts, that's fine. But if you're doing this for mental health resolution or certain in-depth self-discovery, there are certain situations, there are certain protocols that I would advise that you follow. There are certain places that I would say that you shouldn't follow or go to.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's what I think needs to be talked about and discussed and developed. And that's, again, what Heroic Hearts Project does, is myself or my teams go to these centers to make sure that it kind of aligns with what we've seen has worked. Because I've been to certain ayahuasca circles or psilocybin circles, and again, they're fine for their community, but I would never send a veteran there just because I don't think it would be necessarily good for the trauma that they have, or even maybe good for the circle.
Right. This is kind of a little off topic, but maybe on topic, but it's just reminding me of some conversations I've been having recently with some clients. And so something that was popping up in my mind as you were speaking was just some conversations I've just been having with clients recently, and just kind of like the difference when people come to therapy. They're like, I could share the same stuff with friends or family, but for some reason, it just feels a lot deeper here. And, I've been having a lot of like conversations recently just about container, right? And, we're showing up in a certain container to work on things, maybe on a conscious level. And, sometimes when we are showing up, maybe in more recreational spaces, we can have those therapeutic outlets, maybe have more connection, but there is something about creating that therapeutic container that allows people to go deeper, maybe allows people to feel safer in their process, to talk about things that may feel very vulnerable to share with a close friend or a family member. So yeah, I think that is important to really think about that as we move forward.
Absolutely. And I think the great thing, but possibly to the detriment, especially now as there's a lot of enthusiasm around psychedelics, is that they do a lot of the heavy lifting, and they have all the fireworks and all the things that grab our attention, which can oftentimes overshadow all the small details before, after, and throughout that are absolutely essential. And, a lot of this, I'm not saying anything new, but a lot of people will say, the integration is just, if not more important about it. But it's also, and that's absolutely true. And just, I've seen a lot of practitioners who might not necessarily be the most knowledgeable or have the most experience, but they get a lot of praise oftentimes because the psychedelic does the heavy lifting. But the risk there is those that don't necessarily have the experience that they need in those small cases or in the after cases when a lot of stuff comes out or it's a particularly challenging experience, that's when it can be problematic. And that's when you really see the difference between good and bad practitioners, or I don't want to say bad, but inexperienced. But it's also too, this container, it's everything, because there's a lot going into it, and especially for veterans, like, do they trust? And that's the value of having a veteran organization take them, because if it was a strange group, they might not be able to be vulnerable in that trust because they're in this hyper vigilant state. But being surrounded by other veterans and being in nature adds so much to it. And then also the after side of it is, again, we often see the immediate benefits of this, but people can continue to purge emotions, and things come up for weeks, if not even longer after this. And so, sometimes extreme anxiety and extreme depression can follow these ceremonies because it's still coming up. It opens them up. It's the first time they're experiencing these emotions. And so that's when you need to again, this broader container that we're trying to develop of having, and that's where professionals come in too, because the last thing any of us want to do is do more harm. And so if you're really opening up some people, and sometimes it can be hard for them to process it, you want to have that sort of peer support, but you also want to have the safety net of people who are trained in mental trauma and dealing with these stuff, so they can de-escalate the situation. They can ascertain what the next best steps are. So all of this is very important, which often doesn't necessarily get thought about a lot, because again, the psychedelic it's beautiful and it's great, but that's what we need to have these conversations about. But to your point on the container, I've worked with a lot of people who have done psilocybin or LSD recreationally, and even psilocybin, like they'll go into a retreat that's specifically psilocybin with intention. They'll have the preparation. They'll have sort of the music, the sound healing around it, and the same substance just in this different container. They'll be like, "Oh, I didn't even know psilocybin could do that. Like, I had no idea it could be that deep," And that's a pretty common thing, and that's the same, and let alone a different substance that has its own personality and its own intensity, like going from that to ayahuasca.
Well, cannabis, for example, like what Daniel McQueen does over at Medicinal Mindfulness, like hearing some of the testimonials from people that have attended his workshops and stuff like that, it was like, yeah, how all of a sudden, like, I could use cannabis recreationally on my own time and then do it in this container with live music. And, I'm not 100% sure what that container's like, but, it's more of an intentional setting where somebody's showing up and using that for a purpose, and people talking about, wow, that was like really profound, like an ayahuasca experience.
Yeah, absolutely. And, ketamine's the one that comes up too. It's like, if you have the right dose and you're in the right setting, and, like if you have that dose and you don't have music and you don't have that setting around you, then you're pretty much just like stuck in this black void. But if you create this container around it, then it can actually be a pretty psychedelic experience itself.
Absolutely. Yeah. There's so many different avenues for healing here. So we've got to just keep making progress. Now, I'm trying to think if there was anything else around SP519. Did SP519 get paused essentially because this particular session of the government was about to end?
So, originally the hope was to get it passed through in this session before it closed down. It was paused just because there was too many doubts of how many yes versus no votes we would get in the assembly, and the changes that we might have to make to get into the assembly, because it has to go through this committee that then decides whether it can be voted or not. And that committee decides if the bill's good by itself, needs amendments, or just gets thrown out. And it was kind of looking like we would have to make some sacrifice to the bill, which I think we might have done. But then doing that and still not having assurance that it would pass the assembly would have just been disastrous, all things considered. So it just made more sense. And so the efforts will really just be education and all that. Because like I said, when we are able to talk to a lot of these representatives and they see the benefit and they see why this is a good next step and not dangerous, then a lot of them come to the side, or at least start that conversation. So that's sort of the next step. It's a year. Like I said, we get excited about how fast all this has progressed, but in the broad scheme of things, in 10 years, we're not going to remember if it passed in 2021 or 2022.
Right.
It's a long project, right? We're millions, if not billions deep in the drug war, and we're digging our way out. Please have context, like historical context for those of you who are disheartened or feeling despair. Know that this has been going on for a long time, and it's worth studying the history so you can reset your expectations.
And just having it out there it all has ripple effects. So with the Texas bill, with this bill, it's inspiring other bills. It's informing how to approach other bills. It is, for those that are listening, it is getting on the federal government radar across the board. So, even if there's not that direct effect, that doesn't mean there's not other effects going on. And so people are paying attention across the board. We mentioned, I think, before the recording, Rachel Yehuda, who is in the Bronx and has a center of excellence, which is going to be studying psychedelics for the VA, which is a huge undertaking. We have Eric Stoffers in Oregon that's doing other like psilocybin trials for the VA. So it's happening. We're having, and just through us, we have a lot of people from the VA reach out to us and trying to learn more. So if anybody is from the VA listening to this, please reach out, because we are actually gathering people who are like-minded, so we can better track what's happening at different branches throughout the VA. So that's actually happening right now with a few great members. So if you are, please reach out, and we'll kind of include you on the list of people that can see what other branches are doing.
That's excellent. Yeah. Are you familiar at all with the AOC psychedelic research funding bill? I think this one's really interesting, and it made a lot of progress recently in terms of getting more votes this time around compared to last.
Unless it's changed, the thing I was tracking was she was trying to remove the writer from the federal funding budget. And so because these substances are all Schedule 1, there's a specific writer in the federal funding that has prevented any of those funds going to research of Schedule 1 substances for whatever reason. I don't know. It doesn't make much sense to me, but that's the fear of the drug war. And so the last thing I know, she was trying to remove that. So was there other aspects of it?
Not really. In particular, it's like, how do we get funds for psychedelic research? There are ways to do it right now. Rachel Yehuda, we recorded with her a little while ago, and she had some commentary on how you would actually get federal funds allocated towards psychedelic research right now with the laws we have right now. And she was a member of a panel who was at Carhart Harris, Rick Doblin, Matt Johnson, and Rachel Yehuda, I think. And Rachel was the one saying, we do have access to federal funds. It's just a little trickier. But I think this would lower the hurdle, lower the barrier to entry, and we would get a lot more science done, which would really help move the needle, I think.
Yeah, there's a few other initiatives that are trying to tackle it differently as well. Like I said, there's actually people talking to inner circles in the federal government. There's a group that we're friendly with, the Apollo Pact, that's trying to make moves within the NIH to specifically allocate funding for this. And I think there's the recent, I think it was like the NIH director or former director actually came out and had a pretty good quote in support of looking more into psychedelics. So, I mean, that's the thing. The results are so positive. It's been extremely hard to ignore, which from a researcher standpoint, they tend to not have any political stake in the game. They just want to better the science. And so fortunately, a lot of them are getting access to these reports, and follow where the science is saying. That's their whole life.
Right. And then maybe we can start talking about a harder topic that's quite new. Not really that new, I guess, but impacting veterans hugely. Number of veteran friends, so I'm getting to see it firsthand. It's not the best. So we're withdrawing from Afghanistan, or have somewhat fully. I know that's a little contested, but we have largely withdrawn. Afghanistan is de facto being run by the Taliban currently, and soldiers put upwards of 20 years into Afghanistan. And I can only imagine the level of despair, disdain, and many other, terms we could throw out for, what put in so much work, lost friends, got hurt, sacrificed so much. And, just kind of seeing what happened over the last, few months or a month or two in Afghanistan has been pretty terrifying. But and I know the VA has been reaching out to soldiers who are high risk to say, like, hey, are you doing okay? Can we do anything? Which is nice, but is it a little bit too little too late, or is it just all they can do? Or I don't know. How do you like to think about this or talk about the withdrawal?
Yeah, so it's obviously on a lot of people's minds, and I know a lot of, myself included, have gotten reached out from a lot of people who just want to show support or see how they're feeling about it. And what I generally tell people is it's very complex. As with all this stuff, there's not black and white. It's not just like an anger or should we stay or shouldn't we go. Everybody has their own opinions, and everybody has their own associations and different things that might have stuck out. For instance, I was talking to a pilot. We're in sort of a veteran talk circle, and for him, just the imagery coming from those planes with all the Afghanis trying to get on and them falling off was extremely traumatizing for him, because he couldn't help but put himself in the spot of that pilot, of how, one, could that base fall that quick, and how could that pilot take off with all that, and how does that guy feel? So for him, that was that case. For others, if they're big, like if they went in with that sort of fervent patriotism in a good way, not in a bad way, of I'm doing something important and this is actually protecting freedom or trying to bring freedom. For them, it might be like, was my service useless or what have you? And so we've been having these conversations because, all these emotions are valid. So there's anger, there's depression, there's sadness for the women over there. There's sadness for those that didn't make it out. It's very, very complex, and not one veteran is going to experience the same. And everybody has their own way of going through these emotions. I will say, one, it does bring a lot of things to surface. So for a lot, it will be bringing that trauma to either higher levels. We've been seeing that we have a bunch of retreats in September, and there's just been a noticeable uptick in apprehension and anxiety and just existential issues that our coaches have had to be extra conscientious of. But for my side, and for any veteran side, their service was not worthless at all. When they're there, they're doing their job and they're doing it for people around them, and they're doing exactly what the military needed of them. And so there was not, that's kind of what I tell people that go off that, like they did their job and they did what they needed to do, and they should be proud of that. Everybody who went over there with noble means should be proud of their service. For me, I don't know, this is kind of how I interpret it. I know it's not that helpful for everybody, but this is how I view it more zoomed out is, there's like a separation of the reason I enlisted, the reason I joined was for almost this archetype of a soldier, of like, they're in society, until we figure out how to change the system, there's always been the need for service members, for people to protect and people to put themselves in danger for others in whatever form that looks like, whether it's sort of a National Guard or a police officer or a soldier. There's always been this need of protecting those that aren't able to protect themselves from society. And there is that noble energy, and there's that energy of service, that archetype of service that brings people into that. The same as there are certain personalities that are drawn to teaching or drawn to healing, or combination. And that's always been the case. That's why people continue to do it. And so for me, when you enlist in that, it's for those means, and it's for, we do have a luxury of being in this country for a lot of reasons. I have my own critiques and everything like that. But if we go to the base core and what we are trying to achieve, if the North Star of everything that we're doing, there is a lot of value in sacrifice for that, I believe, as a society, and for others that are also trying to do that. And with that, there's the expectation that those that make the policies, the politicians who are relying on the service members, relying on the military for, again, what you hope is noble means to affect policy that is protective of the community, of the society, that those will be aligned and that those will be used in accordance with their sacrifice. And I think that's kind of become a little bit separate. And so for me, going there, it was for those very specific reasons, and doing my job on a day-to-day basis and being surrounded by these other people. And when you're on the job, it's on the ground level. Like, it's a life or death situation. You are fighting people who are not necessarily the greatest. They've done some pretty bad stuff. You can debate whether we should be there or not, but when you're at that moment, that's the question. It becomes a little bit more simple there. But I have no effect on the policy. I have no effect on the politician. Maybe now I do with a voice. And I hope veterans that are frustrated by this, they use their voice and they enact the change. because if they feel deserved, the only way to change that is vote or go up to the politician. And so that is kind of the disparity of, there's that expectation where this group, the politicians, use that. And I think that has been sort of a disservice. I think that's been a disconnect. And I think that can have pretty bad ripples on society and culture of why that happened, why we were in these wars that really had no end game, that really had no real game plan, and that it ended like this should be talked about, should be discussed, of what mistakes were made, how do we not get in that situation again in the future, and how do we connect those that are making the decisions more to the ground level. Because when I was over in Afghanistan and one deployment, I was training the troops, and for a lot of the other people in my community, it was pretty clear years and years ago that this was not going to work. It was pretty clear that this was just a matter of time, and it just took whichever president wanted to get out before this similar situation would happen. And that can be very disparaging when you're there, but that also needs us to ask questions of why we were in that situation where it was very clear that there was just sort of a lack. And I think the same thing with what happened, just a complete lack of the culture, of the situation, of what is actually possible there, given the history and how what the people want, the Afghani people want. And there just seems to be this disconnect from going into it to leaving it and everything in between. So those are the questions we need to ask. Why is that happening? Why is there such a disconnect there?
Right. And bridging that back into like, how can we be respectful of veterans who served over there, lost friends, lost, a lot of things. And like, what can we as civilians do, in the short term, and then like long-term advocacy? It seems like, groups like yours, vets, et cetera, would be great places to, help funnel attention and finances.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we're on the trauma side, and this is going to be a big trauma. So, I mean, on that side of getting people, and the way to really empower voices, or the way to make change, I think, is you have to heal trauma first. For people to actually come back, learn from their story, and help others, they need to be helped first. And so that's kind of that first step that we're trying to help out, because there's nothing more powerful than a veteran that's gone through our program, that's been completely reaffirmed in their life, and then that voice is one of the strongest, because they're going to yell it off the mountaintop. For those that are connected, it's just as always, just be supportive, be a sounding board, understand the emotions are complex. If somebody wants to share, then be there for them. If they don't want to share, be there for them in a different capacity. But it's just understanding that this can be a lot for a lot of people, and they might not even understand the emotions that are coming out. And so for those, it's really, it's that community kind of thing. It's sort of that relationship 101. Like if you're trying to fix the person's problems and you're not helping, it's better oftentimes just to be that sounding board, or being there in support. That's generally the most helpful sort of thing.
Right. You talk about healing trauma, and I wonder, psychedelics, let's vision we can get that integrated, and that's a treatment option for vets, and we heal part of that trauma. But I guess going a little bit deeper, do you see any other things that we would need to focus on, like post-trauma treatment, like thinking about like integration? Like what other struggles maybe have you been through after psychedelic experiences and reintegrating after dealing with all the complex policies, going over, coming back? Like, are there any other challenges that you or your friends have really bumped up against even after psychedelics?
Yeah, I mean, life is difficult. And it's unfortunately, the current models don't support longer term or comprehensive care. The current, especially insurance models, support diagnostics and prescription. That's kind of the reimbursement model. And so you even talk to psychotherapists, and oftentimes they try to avoid insurance because then it prevents them from doing decent healing, because it's quick in, quick out. What needs to happen, especially on the mental health side, is this pipeline is more tools and more community building. And I don't have the straight answers for that, but we're trying to figure it out along the way. So I mean, there's a constant barriers because everybody needs different tools and everybody gets hit with life differently, and we're spread out, and so it can be hard to have that in-person community. So I'd say those are sort of the biggest issues of just figuring out of how do we rethink this? How do we rethink it's not that you are depressed and so therefore there's just one way of treating you in this pill, but you are depressed, Kyle. How do we figure out what's going on in your life? Like, where are you at? How can we support different aspects? Is it because you just lost your job and you're worried about finance? Is it because you actually have a disposition towards depression? Is it relationship issues? Are you eating McDonald's every day? Or have you not gone to the gym after a while? There's so many different elements that we need to look at, and it can be overwhelming, but I think there's a few key things that we can do. But just getting to know it's therapy, it's basic therapy of like, you have to know the person, you have to know the patient to effectively treat them. You can't just there's no robotic diagnostic or robotic healing for mental health. It can supplement it, but it can't be the full thing. Yeah, I mean, the burden right now, which I think we're all coming across, I think the biggest one is the financial structure, the economics of all this, is that we see the benefit of psychedelics. We see the benefit of psilocybin and MDMA. And, it's likely it's going to go through the insurance model, which would be great. It's just another option. But in terms of effective care and in terms of the communities that have never been served by insurance model, how do we help them? How do we help those that fall through the cracks and make either the insurance model more robust or a parallel system that helps this? Because if we consider, like, even if psilocybin are legal today or legal for therapeutic use, what's, like a session is going to be 7-8 hours, and you're going to have an MD there or a therapist to monitor you the whole time, or at least somebody to sit for you. And with the cost of having somebody engage for that many hours and how many sessions you need, like, this is going to start being pretty heavy cost for doing this traditional way we do therapy. And so that's where the discussions right now are, and the beauty, and I think that's what psychedelics are bringing. It started communally, and tribal society is often pretty healthy mentally because it's the full community, the full tribe to support them. So I think we need to learn lessons from that and figure out how we adapt that model, make it, fit within the economic framework that we have, and a little bit more sustainable, a little bit less cost burden. And I think that is in group therapy sessions. And I know some people are doing some studies around that, which I'm excited about, specifically for the veteran community. So those are the considerations. It's all very new. It's all interesting, exciting, frustrating. But we need to kind of think long term of what didn't work in the system. And the reason we're here is because a lot of things didn't work. And I think we need to take this opportunity. I think psychedelics are highlighting what didn't work. So clearly, for a lot, this insurance model didn't work. The prescription model didn't work. The strict, for veterans, I'd say, the strict diagnostic adherence to the DSM-5 model of you have PTSD and that's what you have without any other consideration. I think that didn't work. I think testing or some aspects of the FDA process didn't work for psychedelics or cannabis. We see still the delays of that because it's unconventional. It's not a specific chemical. It's a plant or a substance or a compound.
Right.
So I think there's just a lot of things that we should reconsider and look at what didn't work and how can we improve it? How can we make things that don't prevent things like psychedelics from being developed for 60 years while people are suffering?
Right. Like, how do we speed this? Like, we've got all this historical data, from the medical research. We've got a lot of, cultural data. This stuff's been around for a long time, used well and skillfully. And how do we accelerate it and not get bogged down by, another 8 years of FDA protocol? It's a hard one. For me, it's a both and. I want the FDA trials to happen, but I also think people should be having access sooner than later too, which is why I was so excited when we started talking, Jesse, because you're like, it's available now. Let's just make it happen. And, yeah, amazing. Do what you can with what you've got.
I mean, that's exactly. And that's sort of there needs to be a more common, like there's a lack of common sense approach, I think right now, or that's where we need to kind of take that step back. Is the FDA model is great. Like if we have a brand new chemical that's for some sort of heart condition or cancer, like go through the FDA trials, we have no idea what this does. Let's see what the side effects are. Let's see how it actually interacts with the body, go through those rigorous trials. New chemical development, perfect, right? That's what everybody wants. I think we can all agree on that, even if it might be a slow process. Possibly add in that compassionate access for terminal people. That's a pretty easy side of it. But on the other side, it's ridiculous to try to push psilocybin through that same exact thing with all the historical, even if it is anecdotal, and even if it doesn't necessarily pass that rigor. There's a common sense element that I think is being missed, is that people have been taking this for thousands of years. If there really was like, this can cause you to die on an instant, we would have known about it right now. If there was like the same sort of concerns that we have with any other drug, that would have come about. That's not saying it's, 100% we know exactly what it's doing and there's no like risk or anything like that. But there's this common sense piece that we can't just treat it like it's this brand new chemical and take that same amount of time. Or even if we do, there needs to be some sort of like extended compassionate access of like, yeah, I mean, we can kind of assume this is not going to be the end of the world if you take it. So let's be conscientious about this. But while this is being studied, we can open it up to this or this or this. That's lacking right now. And I think, relatively speaking, on a indigenous scale, or how long we've been using psychedelics, the FDA is a relatively new organization if we're going on that scale. So it's kind of, hopefully this brings that conversation. I know it's hard because these things tend to get dogmatic. People get caught up in like, this is the only way. We see that right now with sometimes the double blind sort of placebo, which again is kind of a somewhat of an issue with some of these psychedelics. But that's kind of been the standard for a chemical, which makes sense, but not for things that have psychoactive properties. So yeah, I really hope this brings a lot of conversation to that, and get people past this is the only way to do it. I think psychedelics are the counter to that. Like, we realize that one version of reality is no longer the way to go about things.
There's so many approaches. Yeah. It's kind of crazy how many different avenues we could be taking here to help develop this. And yeah, think with, a sense of plurality, maybe might be the way to put it. We recorded with Jeremy Narby yesterday. I think it was author of Cosmic Serpent. He said, "Don't trust yourself too much." I think was the line. I loved it. This will be out a lot sooner than that will be, but people should check that one out when it's there. But there's, we can get ourselves a little trapped in thinking, and we should try to be a little bit more open in our thinking. Yeah. This is something that comes up for me regularly when I discuss the drug war. It's like, let's stop doing harm first, and then we can really, really heal. If we're spending our tax dollars to harm and then trying to backfill, trying to heal, like an ounce of prevention, that kind of thing goes a long way.
Yeah. It's hard. It's just, there's different incentives to each, those that gain benefit from the drug war aren't concerned about the healing, so it's exactly. For them, it's not an either or. It's they're in their position of power because of it. And so, there are already people that can hold both cognitive dissonance in their head of having been in favor of the drug war and in favor of psychedelics for healing.
Right.
And not to get too caught up in that, but if it's, their memoirs can speak for themselves, but as long as it's kind of pushing, like you said, to better outcomes. And I'm emboldened because of people who are a part of these movements in the psychedelic space tend to be very sincere in their efforts for the most part.
Right. It is pretty nice to see that. Yeah. And it does help knowing how dedicated people are. Yeah.
Yeah, I think at this stage, like it's still early on, and so a lot of the people you see that are dedicating their lives or advocates or changing about facing on this, it's because they've had personal healing or healing within their family, and so you're starting to get other groups, the ones that are looking to make money and all this other kind of stuff, but the core group and the ones that continue to be the loudest voices are still those that saw the light, that saw healing, and so I think that comes with sincerity of trying to push it forward.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Cool. So I'm curious, over the next 6 months to a year, what do you have coming up, and how might people be able to help?
Yeah, absolutely. So, we'll continue to be involved with different measures. It's a new one every day, and like I said, there's a lot of exciting stuff potentially happening federally. A big side behind the scenes, we're trying to just get more voices together, reduce redundancy and use all of our collective voices and research, and push it forward together. So that tends to be happening right now, which is again very endearing. On the heroic heart side, like I said, we have the branches in the UK and Canada. So if you're in either of those countries, please check it out. They're especially the Canada one's relatively new, so we'd love to have different support. Going to try to continue to push for veteran access to psilocybin with Therapeutic up there. The UK is doing great things. We developed a study in the UK branch under Dr. Grace Bless Hopley, who developed the protocol. So it's a psilocybin protocol observational study, the first of its kind to really look at psilocybin's effect on veterans of traumatic brain injury. So more of the physical side. Cool. So we will take the psychological approaches of veterans PTSD, but seeing does it have an effect on those with brain damage and how that then relates to what we see as PTSD, because there is a big overlap of veterans that have brain damage, which can cause symptoms similar to PTSD and then also enhance PTSD from trauma experiences. So we're doing that study. We're fundraising for that. So that's one way people can support. It's interesting. The UK branch will be sending UK veterans to the Netherlands, and the US branch will send Canadian and US veterans to Jamaica and push that forward and take all the research there. So a very interesting study. It will be get some pretty interesting results as well that can help guide future research. Few other research projects. One I'll come back on when I can kind of talk more about it. It's just kind of in the early stages, but with the University of Georgia and all sorts of other organizations, really just trying to continue to push forward our protocols, our connecting vets to these psychedelics. And so we've kind of expanded in the past couple of years. We still have the core of ayahuasca retreats, but we've, similar to the study, connected vets, and we do connect vets to psilocybin. We've worked with some ketamine clinics, and we're developing a research protocol with Phil Wolfson for ketamine. And we work with an organization, a clinic called the Mission Within, that does Ibogaine for veterans. So just sort of across the board, really developing protocols on the ground level, and then just continue to try to work with other organizations and corporations like Dr. Bronner's and some of these other groups that have been great in pushing all these forward and seeing what we can do. And I think, hope this is not too early to tell, but I don't want to ruin the surprise, but we might be working with Horizons in New York to do sort of a Veteran Voices sort of aspect of it around Veterans Day. And the great people at Reconsider who were producers of fantastic fungi. So
beautiful.
There's a lot of great things happening, pushing forward the veteran voice. A lot of exciting things. As with, and I'm sure you guys are the same. It's always hard to say because the end of the year is so many things have changed that it's some of the things you accomplish, but then there's all sorts of other stuff. So yeah, just continue to advocate. We're really trying to push forward some media as well. We have a movie that we're working on with the group in Argentina called Ayahuasca Now that they're near completion. So a lot of exciting things. So follow us, heroicheartsproject.org. There's a newsletter. You can also sign up for the social media, Heroic Hearts Project, across all of them. Just look it up. We have an ambassador program. So for people, veterans, civilians, if you have some sort of desire to be, on the ground floor of this, you want to help us out with your skill set or just some sort of way, or just straight advocacy, you can sign up on our website there. And then veterans, they can sign up for either the psilocybin study, the ayahuasca, and then reach out for Ibogaine treatment as well. And then we can vet you and try to provide scholarships. And then the core way really to support, as with all these organizations, is through donations. We're a 501c3 nonprofit, so your money essentially goes directly to veterans seeking this therapy. We keep very little overhead to date. So any donation, it costs about $4,000 to support a veteran, and this is complete life transformation. And we have nearly 800 vets, and it'll probably break 1,000 by year end on our wait list. So whatever contribution you can help, it really does make a big impact.
Extraordinary. I'm happy you're doing all this. It's a ton.
Yeah.
I'm sure it's overwhelming, but I'm really happy you're doing it. It's good stuff. Cool. So, I guess that's a wrap. Thank you, Jesse, for joining. It's been a pleasure. Can't wait to do more, and hope we can collaborate in some interesting ways that are helpful as well in the future.
Yeah, let's do it. I'm excited. I think there's a lot of potential there. But yeah, thanks, Joe, Kyle. Always good to see you.
Likewise.
We'll be on talking soon. I hope to see you both again in person soon.
Yeah, absolutely. So thanks everybody for tuning in. Again, if you want to support us, check out our classes at psychedelicstoday.com. There's our Navigating Psychedelics program kicks off on September 23. So just a few days away. And that's an 8-week beautiful program, give you a foundation in the space. And then for those of you in Australia, we kick off on October 20, a Wednesday. And that's another 8-week program taught by Australian teachers. So thank you all for tuning in. Really appreciate you all. Thank you, Jesse. And can't wait for the next episode.